Family lied to me. They canceled Christmas so that I wouldn't go. But I found out their biggest secret. They canceled Christmas. Or at least, that's what they told me. But when I opened social media, I saw the truth. My entire family was celebrating without me. No warning, no explanation, just erased from their lives like I never existed. But that was only the beginning of their lies. Because what I discovered next, it wasn't just about Christmas. It was about my entire life. And when I finally uncovered the truth, I made a decision they never saw coming. Stay with me, because this story, it's one they don't want you to hear. I never really fit into my family. It wasn't that I was the black sheep. Exactly, I didn't rebel, I didn't cause trouble. I did everything I was supposed to. I got good grades, went to college, got a respectable job. But somehow, I was always just there. Like furniture. Useful when needed, ignored otherwise. My younger brother, Jason, though he was the sun around which my parents' world revolved, he could do no wrong. Every bad decision he made was excused. Every mistake brushed off. He was finding himself. I was just supposed to have it together. And no matter what I did, it was never quite enough to earn the kind of love, the kind of attention they showered on him. It wasn't always this obvious. When I was younger, I told myself it was just in my head, that they loved us both equally, just in different ways. I convinced myself that I was imagining things, that I was being too sensitive, but little things piled up over the years. Christmas gifts that always seemed a little more thoughtful, a little more expensive for Jason. Family vacations that were suddenly too expensive when I wanted to go, but miraculously worked out when he did. The way my mother gushed about his accomplishments, no matter how small, while my successes were met with a polite nod and a quick change of subject. Still, I tried. God, I tried. I showed up. I helped out. I played the role of the dutiful daughter. And every Christmas, no matter how much it stung, I told myself that this time it would feel different. This time, I would feel like I truly belonged. So when my parents told me last year that they were canceling Christmas because of financial struggles, I believed them. I felt bad for them, even. I told my mother, "Mom, if money's the issue, I can help." I had a steady job. I wasn't rich, but I could pitch in. But she waved it off. "Oh, honey, no, that wouldn't feel right. It's just, things are tight right now. Let's just keep things simple this year." Her voice had that familiar, syrupy, sweet tone she used when she wanted me to drop something. So I did. Christmas morning was quiet. Too quiet. I made myself a cup of hot cocoa, curled up in my apartment in Chicago, and tried to pretend it didn't matter. No big deal. I could have my own traditions. I put on an old Christmas movie, the kind that should have made me feel warm and nostalgic. But the lump in my throat wouldn't go away. I tried to shake it off. I even told myself that maybe they felt bad too. Maybe they missed me just as much. Then, at around 2 p.m., I picked up my phone. Just mindless scrolling. Killing time. And that's when I saw it. A Facebook post. My cousin, grinning in front of a massive Christmas dinner. The caption read, "Merry Christmas with my favorite people. So blessed to spend the holidays with family." And there in the background was my entire family. My parents, my aunts and uncles, my cousins, even my grandmother who they'd said wasn't up for travel this year. And right at the center of it all, Jason, holding up a glass of wine like he was the goddamn king of Christmas. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. They had lied to me. There was no financial struggle. No canceled Christmas. They had just decided I wasn't invited. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through the photos. Picture after picture of them laughing, opening presents, sharing a meal. My mother's famous Christmas cookies. My father carving the turkey. The same traditions we'd had since I was a kid. The traditions I had assumed we were all skipping this year. Except, apparently, only I was skipping them. I felt sick, a slow, creeping nausea that spread through my entire body. How many times had this happened before? How many other times had I been told an event was called off, only to later realize I was the only one left out? I thought back to all the times plans had suddenly fallen through, all the holidays where they said things just didn't work out this year, the birthdays that were too hectic to celebrate, and the photos I'd stumbled upon later, like some cruel afterthought. It wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't an accident. This was a pattern. I put my phone down and stared at the wall, my mind racing. Why? Why wouldn't they just tell me the truth? Why go through all the effort of lying? What was it about me that made them not want me there? And then, like a slap to the face, I heard my mother's voice in my head. That patient, condescending tone she used whenever I confronted her about something uncomfortable. Joshua, you always take things so personally. You know how you are at family gatherings. So serious. You just make things tense. That was it, wasn't it? I wasn't fun like Jason. I didn't make them feel good about themselves. I didn't feed into their little fantasy of the perfect family. I was a reminder of all the things they didn't want to acknowledge. I clenched my jaw. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had erased me. And the worst part? I had let them. Year after year, I had made excuses for them, told myself that maybe next time they'd see me, that if I just worked a little harder, showed up a little more, gave a little extra, they'd finally make space for me. But that was never going to happen, was it? Something inside me shifted that day. Something small but powerful. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sad. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't even angry. I was done. Done pretending. Done excusing them. Done waiting for a family that had already decided they didn't want me. And as I stared at the picture of them, laughing together in their perfect little world, I realized something else. They might have cut me out of their Christmas, but I was about to cut them out of my life. I thought being excluded was bad, but nothing could have prepared me for this. A family friend reached out with information that would change everything, proof that my parents had been lying to me for years. And when I saw what they had done, I knew there was no coming back from this. But before I tell you what I found, I want to know if you were in my shoes. What would you do? Comment 1 if you'd confront them head on, or 2 if you'd go straight to the authorities. Because trust me, things are about to explode. The next morning, my phone rang. I already knew who it was before I even looked. My mother. I stared at the screen, my heartbeat slow and steady, as if my body had already made the decision my mind hadn't fully caught up to yet. I could let it ring. I could ignore her, let her voice go to voicemail, and pretend I hadn't seen what I saw. Pretend I didn't know what I knew. But I wasn't that person anymore. I picked up. Hi, sweetheart. Hope you had a peaceful Christmas. We missed you. My mother's voice was warm, cheerful, completely detached from the gut-wrenching betrayal still sitting heavy in my chest. I could picture her in her kitchen, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, speaking to me like nothing had happened. I tightened my grip on my phone. Really? Because Facebook says otherwise. Silence. A long, telling silence. Then she let out a dramatic sigh, the kind she always used when she wanted to make me feel like I was the unreasonable one. Oh, Joshua, don't be like that. We didn't want to hurt your feelings. It was all very last minute. Last minute? My voice was even, measured, but I could feel the anger curling at the edges. So last minute that Jason had time to order a catered meal? That Aunt Linda had time to fly in from Texas? That you had time to decorate the entire house? Well, honey, you know how you are at family gatherings. There it was, the same tired excuse. So serious, so tense, I finished for her. Right? That's what you were about to say, wasn't it? She hesitated, then laughed, as if trying to brush it off. Oh, don't be so dramatic. We just thought it would be better this way. Better for who? Another silence. I closed my eyes and let out a slow breath. Just tell me the truth, Mom. How many times has this happened? Joshua, you're overreacting. How? Many times? I enunciated each word carefully, forcing her to answer. She sighed again, this time annoyed. Look, sometimes it's just easier. You always have that look on your face, like you're not really enjoying yourself. You don't drink much. You don't laugh as much as everyone else. And you know how Jason likes to have fun. We just thought, well, you don't seem like you fit in sometimes. My stomach twisted. Not you're part of the family no matter what. Not we love you, and you belong with us. Just you don't fit in sometimes. I don't know why it still managed to hurt. After all these years, you'd think I'd be used to it. But I wasn't. Wow, I whispered, mostly to myself. You really don't even hear yourself, do you? Oh, stop, she huffed. You're blowing this way out of proportion. There it was again. The gaslighting. The rewriting of history before my very eyes. This wasn't their fault. No, this was my fault for taking it too seriously, for making it a big deal. I laughed, a short, humorless sound. You're unbelievable, you know that? Joshua, she snapped, her patience wearing thin. If you're going to be like this, maybe we should take some time apart. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable. Click. She hung up on me. I sat there staring at my phone, my fingers numb around the edges. For a long time, I didn't move, didn't blink, and then something shifted inside me. I pulled up my laptop and opened my email. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a second, but once I started typing, I couldn't stop. I wrote to everyone. My parents, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins. Every single person who had been at that dinner. I made it simple, clear, direct. I saw the pictures. The Christmas dinner I was told was canceled due to financial struggles wasn't canceled at all. You didn't forget me. You didn't accidentally leave me out. You deliberately excluded me and then lied to my face. This isn't about a single holiday. This is a pattern, and I want you all to know that I see it now. I see all of you for who you are. Then, just for good measure, I attached screenshots. My mom's text about Christmas being too expensive and canceled for everyone right next to the bright, happy family photos. And I hit send. The responses started coming in almost immediately. Aunt Linda, oh honey, we didn't mean to hurt your feelings. We thought you knew it was happening. Uncle Mark, don't take it personally, kid. Families are complicated. Jason, of course, had the most condescending response of all. Jesus, Joshua, this is exactly why no one wanted you there. You're always looking for something to be mad about. That one made me smile, because it meant I had hit a nerve. But it was my father's email that sealed the deal for me. It was short, direct, and full of barely contained anger. Joshua, I don't appreciate you trying to stir up drama in this family. You are making a scene over nothing. Stop this nonsense immediately before you say something you regret. Ah, there it was. The threat, the warning to back down. The same tone he had used my entire life to remind me that he was in control. But this time, it wasn't going to work. I wasn't backing down. I wasn't playing along anymore. For the first time in my life, I felt something close to power, and I was just getting started. I sat in my apartment, staring at my laptop screen, my inbox flooding with replies. Some were weak attempts at damage control, some were outright dismissals, and some, like Jason's, were dripping with condescension. But my father's email was the one that stuck with me the most. A thinly veiled threat, disguised as fatherly authority. He wanted me to stop. He wanted me to drop it. Pretend this never happened. Go back to the way things were, me being the afterthought, the outsider in my own family, the one who was only useful when it was convenient for them. But that wasn't happening. Not this time. I wasn't sure what I was looking for at first. Maybe just closure. Maybe proof that I wasn't crazy, that this had been happening for years. I started going through old messages, old emails, old texts, and the deeper I dug, the worse it got. There were dinners I had been told were canceled, trips I was assured weren't happening this year, and birthdays I had been conveniently left out of. All of them carefully orchestrated behind my back. But it wasn't just the exclusion that got to me. It was the realization of how much I had convinced myself that they still loved me, in their own way. That maybe I was overthinking it. That maybe, just maybe, I had been wrong. I wasn't wrong. And then, like fate intervening, my phone buzzed. A name I hadn't seen pop up in years. Rachel! Rachel had been a family friend for as long as I could remember, but she had distanced herself over the years. I never really knew why, just assumed life got in the way it always does. Her message was short. Joshua, I saw what happened. There's something you need to know. Can we meet? I hesitated, fingers hovering over my phone. What could she possibly have to tell me? But something in my gut told me this was important. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. She was already there when I arrived, a manila envelope sitting on the table in front of her. Her hands were wrapped around a cup of tea, fingers gripping the ceramic like she was trying to ground herself. She looked up when I sat down, her face tight with something that looked a lot like guilt. I should have told you years ago, she said, voice low, as if the walls had ears. But your father, he made me swear to keep it quiet. I frowned. What are you talking about? She slid the envelope toward me. Your inheritance. I felt a sudden, sharp ringing in my ears. What inheritance? She exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over her face. Your grandfather left you something, Joshua. A lot, actually. He wanted to make sure you had a future, that you had stability. Over $250,000, plus a few properties. Your father was supposed to give it to you when you turned 25. I couldn't breathe. Supposed to? Rachel's expression twisted. He never did. He transferred everything to Jason's accounts. He sold the properties. Every penny that was meant for you, he funneled it to Jason. His businesses, his lifestyle, all of it. It was your money. I sat there, staring at her, the weight of her words crashing down on me like a tidal wave. I had worked myself to the bone, taken out student loans, lived paycheck to paycheck at times, struggled to prove my worth, to earn my place, to deserve something from them, and the entire time they had stolen from me. I should have been furious. I should have flipped the table, screamed, broken down, but all I felt was cold. A deep, numbing cold that settled into my bones. I have the paperwork, Rachel continued, tapping the envelope. Bank statements, property records, signatures. It's all here. My father's email echoed in my head. Stop this nonsense immediately before you say something you regret. He had known. He had known this might come out, and that's why he had tried so hard to shut me up. I swallowed the lump in my throat, my voice eerily calm. Why are you telling me this now? Rachel looked down at her tea, like she couldn't meet my eyes. Because I saw your mother's posts, the way she's trying to paint you as the problem, and I couldn't live with myself if I let them get away with it. I'm sorry, Joshua. I really am. I took the envelope, gripping it so tightly my fingers ached. Don't be, I said, standing up. They're the ones who are going to be sorry. I walked out of that cafe with the manila envelope clutched in my hands like it was a ticking bomb. My pulse pounded in my ears, my body moving on autopilot as I stepped into the cold Chicago air. My breath came out in sharp, white puffs, but I barely felt the chill. My mind was racing too fast, replaying every moment, every lie, every time I had doubted myself. They had stolen from me. Not just love. Not just inclusion, not just the kind of warmth and support every child should have from their parents. No, they had taken something tangible, something real. They had watched me struggle, seen me drown in student debt, let me exhaust myself working extra hours while sitting comfortably on $250,000 that was rightfully mine. And for what? So Jason could live out his fantasy life? So he could blow through my inheritance chasing business ideas that never panned out? I should have known. I did know. The favoritism, the way they coddled him, the way they always brushed aside my needs in favor of his. It had always been right in front of me. I just hadn't wanted to see it, because the alternative, the truth, was too painful. But now I saw everything, and I wasn't about to let it slide. I got back to my apartment and threw my coat onto the couch, pacing the floor as I stared at the envelope in my hands. The logical part of me knew I needed to be careful. This wasn't just about confronting them anymore. This was about legality. This was fraud. This was theft. And I needed to make sure that when I moved forward, I did it the right way. I grabbed my laptop and started researching estate fraud, misappropriation of inheritance, financial exploitation. The deeper I went, the worse it got. What they had done to me wasn't just morally bankrupt, it was criminal. I needed help. I pulled up my contacts and scrolled through the list until I found a name I hadn't thought about in years. Sarah Chen. She and I had gone to college together, but while I had gone into finance, she had gone into law, specifically estate law. We hadn't talked in a while, but I knew she was good. I also knew she wasn't the kind of person to turn her back on someone who had been wronged. I took a deep breath and hit the call button. She picked up on the third ring. Joshua? Wow, it's been ages. How are you? Hey, Sarah. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Listen, I need a lawyer. There was a pause. That's not how I expected this conversation to go. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Yeah, well, it's not how I expected my week to go either. Can you meet? I need to talk to someone who knows their way around estate fraud. That got her attention. A few hours later, I was sitting across from her in a sleek downtown office. The envelope spread open between us. She flipped through the documents, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the details. This is bad, she murmured. I mean, for them. For you, this is a rock-solid case. You have bank statements, property records, transfers all in your father's name, all pointing directly to the fact that he funneled your inheritance into Jason's accounts. I swallowed. What does that mean? Legally? It means they're screwed. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. This isn't just unethical, Joshua. It's straight-up criminal. We're talking financial misappropriation, possibly embezzlement, definitely breach of fiduciary duty. If you take this to court, they don't stand a chance. I exhaled slowly, my heart pounding. And what if I press charges? She studied me for a long moment. Are you sure you want to go that far? I thought about it. Really thought about it. This was my family. My parents. My brother. Pressing charges meant dragging them into court, making everything public. It meant ruining them. But then I thought about the years I had spent bending over backward for them, about the Christmases spent alone, the way they had excluded me, dismissed me, lied to me. I thought about every time I had wondered why I wasn't enough, why they never treated me the way they treated Jason. And then I thought about how they had taken everything from me and never once felt guilty about it. I met Sarah's gaze, my voice unwavering. Yes, I left Sarah's office with a folder full of evidence and a decision that, for the first time in my life, felt completely my own. There was no hesitation, no second guessing, no little voice in my head telling me to be the bigger person, to keep the peace, to let it go. That voice had been silenced. My family had done that themselves. I wasn't going to be their pawn anymore. I wasn't going to be the one who swallowed the hurt and kept playing along while they drained me dry, financially and emotionally. This time, I was fighting back. The first thing I did when I got home was pour myself a glass of wine and sit down at my laptop. My inbox was still flooded with emails from relatives, the usual mix of gaslighting and guilt-tripping. Jason had sent another one, this time with a thinly veiled threat. You really want to start a war over this? Think about what you're doing, Joshua. This is family. I laughed out loud. This is family. That was their last desperate excuse. That was the shield they hid behind every time they did something unforgivable. I had spent my whole life believing that blood meant something, that no matter what, I should keep trying. Keep hoping! But family wasn't supposed to hurt you. Family wasn't supposed to rob you blind and then tell you to sit down and shut up about it. I took another sip of wine and started drafting my next move. If they wanted to play dirty, they had no idea who they were up against. I spent the next 3 days digging through every financial document, every transaction, every legal loophole I could find. I was meticulous. I traced every dollar, every transfer, every shady deal my father had orchestrated to funnel my money to Jason. I compiled everything into neatly organized files. Bank statements, property records, legal contracts. Proof that what they had done wasn't just immoral, it was illegal. Then I made 3 copies. One for myself, one for Sarah, and one for them. The next Saturday, I called my parents and Jason and told them we needed to meet. They were eager, which only confirmed what I already knew. They thought I was coming to apologize. They thought I was about to beg for forgiveness, to patch things up, to return to my role as the quiet, obedient daughter who never caused waves. They had no idea what was coming. They arrived at my apartment that evening, all 3 of them looking smug and self-satisfied, like they had already won. My mother barely waited until she was inside before she started. "Oh, sweetheart," she sighed dramatically, setting her purse down. "I knew you'd come around. I told your father Joshua just needs some time to cool off." I stared at her, deadpan. "Sit down," she blinked. "Excuse me?" "Sit down." I gestured toward the dining table where 3 neatly prepared folders were waiting. Something in my tone must have unsettled them because they hesitated, then sat. Jason rolled his eyes, slouching back in his chair like this was all some big inconvenience. My father leaned forward, his fingers laced together, already slipping into that condescending tone he always used when he thought he was in control. "All right, Joshua," he said smoothly. "Let's talk about whatever nonsense has you so upset." I slid the folders across the table. "Before you say another word, I suggest you read those." They exchanged glances, but my father was the first to open his. I watched his face as his eyes scanned the documents, the color draining from his cheeks. My mother's fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. Jason, the slowest of the 3, took a few extra seconds before his expression twisted into something between panic and rage. "What the hell is this?" he snapped, tossing the papers down. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "That's every illegal transaction, every forged signature, every cent of my inheritance that you stole." "Now, wait just a minute," my father started, but I cut him off. "No, you wait." My voice was sharp, cold, unrecognizable even to myself. "You thought you could get away with it. You thought I would never find out. That I would just keep playing along, keep struggling while you handed everything to Jason on a silver platter." I leaned forward. "You were wrong." My mother started crying, her usual go-to move when things weren't going her way. "Joshua, honey, you don't understand. I understand perfectly," I snapped. "I understand that I spent my whole life thinking I wasn't good enough, that no matter what I did, I would never measure up. And now I know why, because you never wanted me to. You never even gave me a chance," Jason scoffed. "This is so over the top. You're really gonna drag this through the courts? Ruin our family's reputation over a few dollars?" I laughed in his face. "A few dollars? Jason, do you even hear yourself? It's over 250,000. That's not a few dollars. That's my future. That was my security. And you blew it on failed businesses and vacations in Bali." My father's face hardened. "What do you want?" I smiled, slow and calculated. "I'm giving you a choice. You transfer every remaining cent back to me, plus interest, and you sign a confession stating that you knowingly misappropriated my inheritance. Or," I leaned in just a little, "I take this to court, and you all go to jail." My mother's sobs grew louder. My father's jaw clenched. Jason's hand was balled into a fist. They knew I wasn't bluffing. I gave them 48 hours to decide. When they left, the house was silent. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly powerful, because no matter what they chose, they had already lost. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every reaction, every second of that meeting. My mother's trembling hands, my father's clenched jaw, Jason's barely concealed rage. I could still hear the ticking of the clock as I gave them their deadline. 48 hours. 48 hours to decide whether they'd return what was mine or face the consequences. I knew them well enough to know they wouldn't go down without a fight. They weren't the kind of people who admitted wrongdoing. They weren't the kind of people who apologized. No, they'd scheme, manipulate, twist the story to make themselves the victims. That's what they had always done. But this time I was ready for it. By the next morning, my phone was already buzzing. The family group chat, which I had mostly ignored for years, was suddenly alive with messages. Uncle Mark, Joshua, sweetheart, I think you're being a little harsh. Family is family. Aunt Linda, can't we just talk this out? I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. Even my cousin Daniel, who I barely spoke to, had something to say. Come on, Joshua. This is a bit much, don't you think? I didn't respond. Let them stew. Let them wonder what I was going to do next. By noon, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. An hour later, she texted, Joshua, please, let's be reasonable. We don't need lawyers involved. We can fix this as a family. I laughed out loud. The irony of her asking me to be reasonable after years of making me feel like the problem. I took a sip of my coffee, let the silence stretch, made them sweat. Then, around 3 p.m, I got the call I had been waiting for. My father. I answered on the second ring. Have you made a decision? He exhaled sharply. Joshua, listen, no. My voice was steady, firm. I don't want to hear excuses. Have you made a decision? There was a pause. I could hear him shifting, could practically picture him sitting at his desk, running a frustrated hand through his graying hair. Your mother is very upset, he said finally, as if that was supposed to mean something to me. I stayed silent. He sighed. We can't just move that kind of money overnight. That's not my problem. Another pause. Joshua, do you really want to do this? Do you? I shot back. Because I'm fully prepared to take this to court. And once I do, everything comes out. Every lie, every shady transaction, every stolen dollar. You don't just lose the money, you lose your reputation, your credibility. You lose everything. A heavy silence settled between us. I knew what I was asking of him, and I knew how much he hated being backed into a corner. He had spent his entire life controlling people, controlling me, through guilt, through manipulation. But I wasn't that girl anymore. Then, just as I expected, his tone changed. He went from reasoning to threatening in a heartbeat. If you do this, you're out. You understand? No family, no inheritance, nothing. I laughed. I actually laughed. What inheritance? I mocked. You already stole mine and gave it to Jason. There's nothing left for me to lose. He didn't respond, and for the first time, I heard something in his silence that almost sounded like fear. I let it hang for a moment, then delivered the final blow. You have until midnight tomorrow. If the money isn't in my account and the confession isn't signed, I go to the authorities, and I will press charges. Then I hung up. I sat back, heart pounding, but my hands were steady. For the first time in my life, I had the upper hand, and it felt good. The next 24 hours were a waiting game, and I had never been good at waiting. I kept checking my account, half expecting the money to magically appear, but I knew better. My father wasn't the type to cave easily. He was probably pacing his office, coming up with some last-ditch attempt to regain control, calling every lawyer he knew, trying to figure out how much trouble he was really in. My mother, on the other hand, was likely in full damage control mode, calling relatives, spinning the story, playing the victim. And Jason? Jason was probably furious. His golden ticket was slipping through his fingers, and for the first time in his life, there was nothing he could do about it. I stayed off social media, knowing they were probably trying to bait me into a public meltdown. Instead, I focused on keeping myself busy. I went to the gym, pushing myself harder than I had in weeks. I deep cleaned my apartment, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. I cooked a meal I barely ate, anything to keep my mind from spiraling, from second-guessing myself. By the time the deadline approached, I was sitting at my laptop, my lawyer on standby, my hands steady on the keyboard. Midnight came. Midnight passed. No transfer. No confession. Nothing! I stared at my screen, my stomach dropping slightly, but I had expected this. This was who they were. They would rather lose everything than admit they had done something wrong. Fine! If they wanted war, I was more than ready. At 12:05 a.m., I sent the email to my lawyer, attaching everything: the bank statements, the fraudulent transfers, the property records, all of it. Proceed with the charges. I hit send. The next morning, my world erupted. It started with a phone call from an unknown number. I ignored it. Then another, and another. By the time my inbox started flooding with emails, I knew something had happened. I opened my browser, and there it was, my family's downfall, splashed across every local news site. Prominent businessman under investigation for financial misconduct, well-respected family faces allegations of estate fraud, legal battle between father and daughter shocks community. I clicked one of the articles. My breath caught in my throat. My father's name was in bold, followed by the words criminal investigation. The story was already spreading, and I hadn't even done anything yet. Someone must have leaked it. Maybe one of my relatives, maybe someone at the law office, maybe even my father himself, in a desperate attempt to control the narrative before I could. My phone buzzed again. This time, I picked up. Joshua, my mother's voice was raw, panicked. What have you done? I closed my eyes for a second, centering myself. What I said I would. This is everywhere, she hissed, her breath shaky. Your father is being investigated. Reporters are calling. His company's stock is plummeting. Do you have any idea what you've started? I let out a slow breath, opening my eyes, staring out my window at the city below. Yeah, I said. I do. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. You don't understand, Joshua. This isn't just about you anymore. Do you know how humiliating this is? What you're doing to this family? I felt my grip tighten on my phone. What I'm doing, I repeated, my voice steady. Mom, he stole from me. You both did. You let it happen. And now you're upset because you got caught? You are destroying us, she spat, all pretense of maternal concern vanishing. I almost laughed. No, Mom. You destroyed yourselves. There was a long silence. Then she tried a different tactic. The softer approach. We can fix this, sweetheart. If you just know, she faltered. Joshua, I said no. My voice was calm but final. You had your chance. I gave you every opportunity to make this right. You chose this. Another long silence. Then, just before she hung up, I heard it. You'll regret this. Maybe once upon a time I would have. Maybe there was a version of me that would have caved, that would have believed them, that would have backed down just to make things easier. But that version of me was gone. And for the first time in my life, I didn't regret anything. The fallout was faster and more brutal than I expected. Within days, my father's company was in shambles. His business partners started pulling out, distancing themselves from him the moment the words fraud investigation appeared in the press. Clients withdrew contracts. Employees quit. He wasn't just facing a legal battle, he was facing complete and utter ruin. And the best part? I hadn't even done anything beyond exposing the truth. He did this to himself. Jason, of course, wasn't handling things well. I knew he had spent years believing he was untouchable, that no matter what he did, someone, whether it was my parents or me, would clean up his mess. But no one was coming to save him this time. His bank accounts, once overflowing with my stolen inheritance, were now frozen as the investigation unfolded. The yoga retreats, the fancy cars, the expensive lifestyle, it was all gone. And just like that, he went from golden boy to nothing. I thought maybe he'd try to reach out. Maybe he'd try to manipulate me the way he always had, flashing that charming grin and acting like none of this was a big deal. But he didn't. Instead, he sent one last message. "I hope you're happy." That was it. 4 words. No apology. No acknowledgement of what he'd done. Just blame. As if I was the one who had ruined his life, not him. It was almost laughable. Almost. My mother, on the other hand, was relentless. She called, she texted, she even showed up at my building once, standing outside like some kind of ghost from my past, waiting for me to come down. I didn't! I watched from my window as she paced, as she looked around nervously, as if the weight of what she had done was finally settling on her shoulders. Maybe for the first time in her life, she was truly afraid of the consequences. She stayed for an hour. Then she left. That was the last time I ever saw her. The case dragged on for months. My father fought it every step of the way, hiring the best lawyers money could buy. But it wasn't enough. The evidence was overwhelming. The documents Rachel had given me, the bank records, the property sales, it all told a story that couldn't be rewritten, no matter how much they tried. In the end, he took a plea deal, a guilty plea in exchange for reduced sentencing. He avoided prison, but he lost everything: his business, his reputation, his wealth. He had spent his entire life building an empire on deception, and now he had nothing left. Jason tried to rebuild, but without my father's money, he had nothing to fall back on. The last I heard, he was working a low-paying job somewhere, a far cry from the lavish life he had once flaunted. And me? I was free. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the weight of my family's expectations, their manipulation, their endless need to make me feel like I was never enough. I had moved to a new city, started fresh. I had new friends, real ones, people who didn't see me as an afterthought or a resource to be used. One day, Rachel came to visit me. She brought an old photo album, something she had found while cleaning out her office. Inside were pictures of me and my grandfather. I had forgotten how much time we had spent together when I was younger, how much he had loved me. He always said, "You were the strong one," Rachel told me as I flipped through the pages. I smiled, running my fingers over an old, faded picture of him teaching me how to fish. He had left that inheritance for me because he had believed in me, because he had known, even back then, that my parents would never give me what I deserved. And in the end, he was right. I closed the album, feeling lighter than I had in years. I had won, but more importantly, I was finally free. So, what happens when a family that's built on lies finally collapses? Everything. My father lost his business, my brother lost his golden ticket, and my mother, she lost the control she had spent years using to keep me in line. But the real victory? It wasn't about revenge. It was about freedom. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members? Tell me your story in the comments, because trust me, you are not alone. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Family isn't defined by blood, but by respect, trust, and accountability. No one, no matter their title in your life, has the right to manipulate you, steal from you, or make you feel less than. Stand up for yourself. Know your worth. If someone crosses a line, hold them accountable. Don't let guilt or obligation keep you in toxic cycles. In this country, we fight for what's right. And sometimes, the hardest but most necessary thing you can do is walk away and choose yourself, because no one else will do it for you.